I stood there, staring at her across the room, my hands shaking. 6 years of marriage crumbled into dust in a single moment. It was her eyes, the guilt in them, the way she couldn't even meet mine, not even for a second. Are you going to say anything, Laura? My voice barely came out, but she flinched as if I'd shouted. I needed answers, needed to hear her say the words, to admit what she had done. Maybe then, maybe I could understand. She stood there, arms crossed over her chest, lips trembling. 32 years old, and I had never seen her so fragile. The woman who always had everything under control now looked like a scared child, cornered by the truth. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she whispered, her eyes glued to the floor. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. The words I dreaded were finally out, but they weren't enough. They never would be. 6 years of love, trust, and promises, all undone by a secret I was never supposed to find out. But I did. I found out, and it changed everything. The moment I discovered Laura's secret affair, I knew exactly what I had to do. I was 29 when I met Laura. At the time, I thought I had life figured out. I was the guy with the plan, you know. Working as a software engineer at a solid firm, living in a modest but comfortable apartment, weekends spent with friends, beer in hand, and always the next step in mind. Marriage wasn't really part of that plan, at least not immediately. But then she walked into my life, and all the plans fell apart in the best way possible. We met at a friend's engagement party, one of those overly formal, too crowded gatherings where you only know a handful of people but somehow get roped into going anyway. Laura stood out the moment I saw her. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable, with her wavy dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that could make you forget your own name. No, it was her energy, the way she owned the room with confidence but still felt approachable. Like she could see right through any small talk and go straight to what mattered. By the end of the night, we were sitting on a balcony away from the crowd, talking about everything from music to our careers to travel dreams. We laughed at how different we were. She was a marketing manager with a chaotic, fast-paced life, always jumping from one project to the next, while I liked structure, routine, knowing what came next. But maybe that was why it worked so well. Opposites attract, right? We started dating, and it wasn't long before I fell for her hard. Everything about Laura felt right. She challenged me, made me see the world differently. The way she'd talk about marketing strategies like she was going into battle, the fire in her eyes when she was passionate about something, it was intoxicating. She was 26 at the time, and even then, she knew exactly what she wanted from life. Or at least, that's what I thought. We got married 2 years later. It wasn't a grand affair, just close friends and family in a quiet garden ceremony. When she said, "I do," I believed her. I believed that this was forever. And for a while, it felt like it would be. We were the couple everyone envied. We had the house, the stable jobs, and eventually, even a dog named Cooper that we both adored. Life was good. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who didn't? But there were signs I ignored, signs I should have seen. It started with the late nights at work. Laura had always been ambitious, but her job was becoming more demanding. She was constantly traveling for meetings, staying late for campaign launches, or client dinners. At first, I didn't question it. Why would I? She was successful, driven, and I was proud of her. I'd cook dinner for us, leave it out, and wait up, falling asleep on the couch with the TV on until I'd hear the door click open, sometimes well after midnight. When I asked her about the long hours, she'd shrug it off. Just a busy season, she'd say with that disarming smile of hers. She always had the right words to put me at ease. She was good at that, calming me down, making me trust her even when things felt off. Then came the phone. I should have known when she started guarding it like it held state secrets. Before, she'd leave it lying around, and we'd casually scroll through each other's photos or show funny memes. But now, it was always glued to her hand or tucked away in her purse. One night, I noticed her texting someone after she thought I had fallen asleep. The glow of the screen lit up her face, and her expression wasn't one I recognized. There was something there, something secret, something private. "Who are you texting?" I asked, my voice groggy. She jumped, quickly turning the screen off. "Just work stuff. Go back to. Sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to let you know how your support can make a huge difference. By subscribing to this channel, you're not only helping me financially but also enabling me to create even better stories and content for you. Your support directly impacts the quality and quantity of the stories I can bring to life, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of this journey. Sleep. It was the little lies that started to pile up. She used to tell me everything, what meetings she had, who she was working with. But suddenly, there were gaps in her stories. People's names changed, events didn't line up. I told myself I was just being paranoid. That maybe I was too suspicious, that it was all in my head. But the truth has a way of bubbling to the surface, no matter how hard you try to suppress it. The final crack came one night at a dinner party we hosted. Laura was chatting with her coworkers in the kitchen, and I overheard a name I had never heard before. James. He was laughing at one of her jokes, his voice too familiar for my liking. Something about the way she said his name, how easily it rolled off her tongue, made my stomach churn. That night, after everyone had left, I asked her, "Who's James?" She froze, just for a second. But in that second, everything I feared became real. "Just a colleague," she said, too quickly. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was a crack in her armor now, and I wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. It took weeks of subtle questions, quiet observations, and my own internal battle before I could no longer ignore the signs. The pieces were all there, and they painted a picture I never wanted to see. And then I found the texts. Hidden in a separate folder on her phone, buried under work emails. Messages from James. They weren't just friendly. They were intimate, detailed, too detailed. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. All those nights she said she was working late, she was with him. All those dinners I ate alone, she was with him. The woman I loved was leading a double life, and I had been blind to it all. That's when I knew. I knew what I had to do. I wish I could say that when I found those texts, everything became crystal clear, that I immediately knew what I needed to do, but the truth is far messier than that. I sat there, staring at Laura's phone for what felt like hours, my mind racing, heart pounding in my chest. The messages between her and James played over and over in my head, like a broken record of betrayal, each line sinking deeper into my gut. There's a strange kind of paralysis that happens when your world is turned upside down. You want to scream, to lash out, to confront the person who did this to you, but instead, you just sit there, completely numb, not wanting to believe it's real. I couldn't bring myself to wake her up. She was lying there beside me, peacefully asleep, like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't been sneaking behind my back for who knows how long. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. I needed more proof, more clarity. My mind started going over every interaction we'd had in the past few months, every time she'd been distant, every excuse she'd given, and I couldn't stop wondering, how long had this been going on? Was it just a fling, or was there something deeper? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I spent the next few days in a haze, pretending everything was normal, even though I knew it wasn't. I felt like an outsider in my own life, watching from a distance as Laura went about her routine, smiling, laughing, acting like the devoted wife she pretended to be. I was playing a role, too, pretending to be the clueless husband. But inside, I was boiling with anger, confusion, and sadness. There's something incredibly isolating about being betrayed by the person you love most in the world. It's not just the affair itself, but the realization that every moment you thought was real, every laugh, every touch, every intimate moment, was tainted by a lie. It's like waking up in a house you've lived in for years and suddenly realizing you don't recognize it anymore. I started digging deeper. I wanted to know everything. It wasn't enough to know that she had cheated, I needed to understand the extent of it. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. I'd wait for her to fall asleep and then go through her phone again. The texts between her and James were frequent, more frequent than I'd originally thought. They talked about everything: work, life, inside jokes I didn't understand, and, of course, their time together. She had been seeing him for almost a year. A year of lies. A year of late nights, business trips that weren't business trips at all, excuses about work, exhaustion, and, "I'm just too tired tonight, babe." How many times had I made her breakfast in bed, thinking I was being a good husband, only to have her text James the moment I left the room? How many weekends had we spent with friends or family, with me proudly introducing her as my wife, while she was sneaking glances at her phone, hoping to catch a message from him? The anger was a slow burn. It wasn't the kind of rage you feel in a single moment. It built up, day by day, conversation by conversation, as I pieced together the fragments of our life that had been shattered without me even knowing. I became obsessed with finding out more. I started checking her email, her social media accounts, even the calendar she kept for work. I was searching for any clue that would tell me how she had managed to live two lives, right under my nose. It was the business trip to Chicago that really set me off. She had told me she was going for a marketing conference, a big one that would last 4 days. She had to go, she said, to network, to meet clients, to grow her career. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We had always been supportive of each other's careers, and I trusted her implicitly. But when I went through her calendar, I noticed something strange. The conference ended on the third day. What about the fourth? There was nothing on her schedule for that day, no meetings, no events, nothing. Yet she hadn't come home until late that night. I remember that trip vividly. I remember her calling me on the last night, saying she missed me, that she couldn't wait to come home. Her voice was soft, full of affection, the way it always was when we talked on the phone. She asked me how work was, what I'd had for dinner, and told me about the tough meetings she'd had earlier that day. I had no reason to doubt her at the time. But now I knew better. I looked deeper into the dates and found a hotel booking, not for the hotel where the conference had been, but for a different one. A boutique hotel, 2 blocks away. The reservation was for 2 people. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. That was it, the final piece of the puzzle. Laura hadn't just been lying, she had been living an entirely different life with someone else. She had made plans, gone on trips, and shared intimate moments with James while I was home, waiting for her to come back to me. It was like a switch flipped in my mind. The sadness disappeared, replaced entirely by cold, hard rage. I couldn't sit there and let her continue to deceive me, to pretend like everything was okay. I had spent weeks trying to process what was happening, but there was nothing left to process. I had all the information I needed. She was having an affair, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I knew I had to confront her. But I wasn't going to do it without a plan. If Laura had been strategic in her betrayal, I was going to be even more strategic in my response. I wasn't going to be the husband who fell apart, who let his life crumble because of someone else's actions. No, I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of pain she had caused me. That's when I decided on my course of action. I didn't want to just confront her in the heat of the moment. I didn't want to explode with emotion and let her twist the narrative. No, I was going to make sure the truth hit her in a way she couldn't escape from. So, I started planning. Meticulously. I reached out to a lawyer, quietly, discreetly, and began the process of protecting myself. Laura might have been 2 steps ahead of me with her affair, but I wasn't going to let her blindside me when it came to ending things. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, I would have everything in place, the house, the finances, even Cooper. I wasn't going to lose everything because of her choices. As the days passed, I played my part perfectly. I pretended nothing was wrong, that I hadn't seen the texts, that I didn't know about the trips, the lies, the other man. Laura continued her double life, unaware that I was watching her every move, preparing for the moment I'd reveal what I knew. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about taking control of the situation, about showing her that I wasn't some clueless, pathetic husband she could deceive. I was going to make sure that when I confronted her, I did it on my terms, in a way that would leave her with no way out. And I was almost ready. Almost. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. Something that threw my entire plan into chaos. She came home one evening, her face pale, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. She sat me down on the couch, her hands trembling, and told me she had something to confess. For the first time in weeks, she looked vulnerable. And I realized, I might not have to confront her at all. She was about to confess everything. Or so I thought. Laura sat across from me, wringing her hands, her fingers moving in those nervous circles she always did when she was about to say something difficult. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine, and for a moment, I thought I had won. I thought the burden of her guilt had finally become too much for her to bear and that she was going to spill everything right then and there. The moment hung in the air, thick with anticipation. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was it. After weeks of waiting, digging, and strategizing, she was going to break under the weight of her lies. She started, her voice shaky. I don't even know how to say this. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, letting the silence grow heavy between us, knowing that the more uncomfortable she became, the more she would unravel. I was ready for the confession, ready for her to fall apart in front of me. And then I would drop the hammer. I would let her know that I had already known for weeks. I had already planned my response. There was nothing she could say to make it better. But she didn't confess. Not to what I thought she would. I lost my job, she said, her voice cracking. Wait, what? That wasn't what I was expecting. I sat there, staring at her, my mind scrambling to catch up. Losing her job. That had nothing to do with James. Why was she bringing this up now? She put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as if she was holding back tears. It's been going on for months, she continued, her voice muffled by her hands. The company was having trouble, and they started laying people off. I thought I'd be safe, but, she let out a heavy sigh, her words trailing off. Months. The word echoed in my mind. That timeline lined up with the affair. The same time she'd started sneaking around with James, she'd also been dealing with this. My mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together. Had losing her job been some kind of trigger for the affair? Had the stress of it all driven her into the arms of someone else? I still hadn't said anything. I wasn't sure what to say. I had been ready for a confession about the affair, about James, but now this whole new element had been thrown into the mix. She had lost her job, and she'd been hiding it from me for months. She must have been pretending to go to work, pretending everything was fine while secretly dealing with this enormous stress on her own. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered, wiping at her eyes. I was so embarrassed. I thought if I could just find something else, I could fix it without you ever knowing. But it's been so hard, Ethan. It's been so hard to keep up the lie. I sat there, stunned, my plan crumbling before my eyes. This wasn't the confession I wanted. This wasn't the moment I had been preparing for. She had thrown me off balance completely. Now I had two lies to contend with, the affair and her secret about losing her job. It wasn't that I didn't care about her being unemployed, it's that this was just another thing she'd hidden from me. Another deception. I didn't know whether to feel sorry for her or angry. Maybe both. There she was, sitting across from me, vulnerable, broken, confessing something huge. And yet, it wasn't the thing that had been tearing me apart for weeks. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to tell her that her job wasn't what was killing me inside, it was James. It was her sneaking around behind my back. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded, still playing my part. I wish you had told me, I said, my voice steady, careful not to let any of my real emotions slip through. We could have figured this out together. She nodded quickly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I know I should have told you. I didn't want you to think less of me. It was strange, hearing her say that. Think less of her, as if her losing her job would have ever made me think that way. She had no idea, no clue that the real thing tearing us apart wasn't her job, but her betrayal. It was like she was living in a completely different reality from me, a reality where she thought this was the worst thing she had done. The irony of it made my stomach twist. I wanted to laugh at how ridiculous it was. She was sitting here, ashamed of losing her job, while I was sitting on the knowledge that she had been sleeping with another man for almost a year. But then something shifted in her expression. Her eyes, red from crying, flickered with something deeper, something that made me sit up a little straighter. There's more, she whispered, her voice so low that I almost didn't catch it. My pulse quickened. Was this it? Was she finally going to tell me about James? I didn't want to do it, she said, her voice trembling again. But I was desperate. We were running out of money, and I didn't know how to tell you. So, I borrowed some from a friend. My mind was reeling again. What friend? Was she talking about James? Was she trying to ease me into the truth, testing the waters to see how I would react? Who? I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated. James, she finally said, her eyes dropping to the floor. There it was. The name I'd been waiting for, the name that had haunted me for weeks. But the context was different. She was framing it as a loan, not an affair. My anger flared up again. Was she really going to sit here and try to downplay what had happened between them? Did she think I was that clueless? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice calm. Why didn't you tell me? Why go to him? I didn't want to worry you, she said, her voice shaking. And James, he's been a friend for a long time. I thought it would be easier, less formal than going to a bank or asking family. Easier. That's what she called it. Easier to sleep with him, too, I bet. But I kept my mouth shut, letting her dig herself deeper. And I pressed. What happened after that? She looked away, her hands trembling again. Nothing, really. He just helped me out when I needed it, and that's it. That's it. That's all she was going to say. My blood boiled as I realized she was still lying, still trying to minimize what she had done. She was sitting there, telling me half-truths, hoping I wouldn't ask the right questions, hoping I wouldn't push any further. I couldn't believe her nerve. She had just admitted to taking money from the man she was sleeping with, and she expected me to believe that nothing else had happened. That they were just friends. I was done playing nice. Laura, I said, my voice low, steady. I know about you and James. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, panic flashing across her face. I had her. The mask was starting to slip, and for the first time, she looked truly scared. I didn't let her speak. I wasn't done. I've known for weeks. The texts, the trips, Chicago. I leaned forward, my voice hard. I know everything. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to figure out how to respond, how to explain her way out of this. But there was no way out. Not this time. Ethan, she started, but I cut her off. Don't, I said sharply. Don't lie to me anymore. You've been lying to me for a year. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down completely. But instead, she did something I wasn't expecting. She straightened up, her eyes hardening, and stared right back at me. Yes, she said quietly. I did sleep with him. And I'm sorry. But you have to understand, it wasn't like that. It wasn't. It wasn't like what? I snapped. Like you were cheating on your husband. Like you were lying to me for months. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't just about the affair. I was lost, Ethan. I didn't know how to handle everything. Losing my job, feeling like I was failing you, failing us. James was just, he was there. He made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. There it was. The excuse. The justification for her betrayal. And I didn't want to hear any of it. So, you slept with him, I said, my voice flat. Because you felt bad about losing your job. Because you were lost. She nodded, her face crumbling again. I know it's not an excuse. I know I hurt you. But I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I sat back, the weight of her words crashing down on me. She was trying to explain it away, to make it seem like it was all about her emotional state. Laura's confession hung in the air, suffocating, thick, and heavy. I stared at her, trying to piece together what had just happened, but everything felt fragmented, like broken glass scattered across the floor. She was still sitting across from me, wiping tears from her face, her breathing shaky. And yet, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness, just cold, hard detachment. I had waited for this moment for so long, for her to finally tell me the truth. I had imagined how it would play out so many times in my head, how she would break down, how she would admit everything, and how I would feel some sort of release. But now that it was here, now that the words had finally come out of her mouth, I felt hollow. It wasn't the catharsis I expected. It wasn't the relief I thought would wash over me when the truth was laid bare. Instead, there was just silence. A gaping void. She looked at me, her lips trembling as she waited for me to speak. But I didn't have the words. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. Everything she had done, everything we had built over the last 6 years, it all felt so far away, like someone else's life. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered again, breaking the silence. I know that doesn't make it right. But I didn't mean for it to go this far. I needed someone, Ethan. I needed someone to talk to. Her voice wavered, pleading for some understanding, for me to grasp the nuance of her betrayal. She wanted me to see her pain, her loneliness, to understand why she had turned to James. But all I could think was that this wasn't about her needing someone. This was about choices, her choices, and how they had ripped us apart. You could have talked to me, I said, my voice finally coming out, though it felt distant, like someone else was speaking for me. I was right here, Laura. I've always been here. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I know, she sobbed. I know, and that's what kills me. I should have come to you. I should have told you everything, about my job, about how I was feeling. But I was so scared. I didn't want to burden you. I sat there, staring at her, waiting for the wave of anger, the storm of emotions that should have come crashing over me. But there was nothing, just emptiness. Because the truth was, I didn't care about her excuses anymore. I didn't care why she had done it. The fact was, she had done it. She had crossed that line, and no amount of explanation was going to change that. I looked around the room we had spent so many nights in together, the place where we had built a life, shared memories, laughed, argued, made up. Now, it felt like a stage set for a performance that had gone on too long. The props, the furniture, the pictures on the walls, they were all part of a life that no longer felt real to me. You were my wife, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter. You were my wife, I said again, my voice a little stronger this time, as if saying it would help me believe it. Do you even understand what that means? We made vows, Laura. We promised to be there for each other, through everything. You didn't just break my trust, you broke our entire life. She lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes filled with regret. Ethan, I know I did, and if I could take it back, I would. But I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to tell you the truth after everything went so wrong. I shook my head, feeling that cold distance between us growing wider. It was like I couldn't even see her as the woman I married anymore. You didn't know how to stop. You didn't know how to tell me. I repeated, incredulity creeping into my voice. You knew exactly what you were doing. You had months to come clean. But instead, you kept sneaking around, lying to my face, sharing a bed with me while you were sharing your life with someone else. Her face crumpled again, and she sobbed openly, the kind of sob that might have once pulled me to her side, made me comfort her, but now it just felt hollow. I couldn't bring myself to care about her tears. She'd had her chance to cry for our marriage, to cry for what we were. I wasn't going to comfort her now, not after she had burned everything to the ground. I never wanted to hurt you, she said through her tears. I know that sounds hollow now, but I didn't. I thought I could fix us, but I was so lost. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to yell, to let all the anger I had been holding back boil over. But it wouldn't help. It wouldn't change anything. You didn't care enough to stop yourself, I said, my voice icy. You cared more about hiding it from me than you did about actually trying to fix our marriage. She nodded, tears dripping down her face. You're right. You're right about everything. I was selfish. I was scared. But I'm not scared anymore. I'm ready to face this, to face what I did and try to make it right. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Make it right. Laura, how do you make something like this right? There's no fixing this. You can't undo what's been done. She reached out toward me, her hands trembling. Ethan, please. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I lost my way. But I want to fight for us. I want to be the wife you deserve. Those words. The wife I deserve. I almost couldn't believe she said that. My mind flashed back to all the moments I had felt like something was off, all the times she had looked me in the eye and lied, and now she wanted to talk about fighting for us. There's no us, Laura, I said, standing up, putting more space between us. There hasn't been an us for a long time. You killed that the minute you let him into your life, the minute you decided that I wasn't worth the truth. She looked up at me, panic flashing in her eyes. No, Ethan, don't say that. We can still fix this. We can go to therapy, work through it together. I know I messed up, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it up to you. Her desperation was palpable, but it didn't move me. I had waited for this moment, the moment when she would finally face the consequences of her actions. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was emptiness. This wasn't closure. This wasn't the vindication I thought I would feel when she finally admitted everything. I don't want therapy, I said, my voice flat. I don't want to fix this. You had your chance to be honest with me, to come to me with your problems. You chose him instead. You made that choice over and over, and now you have to live with it. She shook her head frantically, rising to her feet, closing the distance between us. Ethan, please. Don't do this. Don't throw away what we had. I love you. We can get through this, I know we can. I looked down at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had spent 6 years building a life with, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had chosen to betray me, who had lied to me, and who was now trying to salvage what little was left of our broken marriage. It's already gone, Laura, I said quietly. You threw it away. Her face crumpled again, and she dropped to her knees, clutching at my leg, sobbing into my jeans. Please, Ethan, please, don't leave me. I don't know what I'll do without you. I don't know how to fix this on my own. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grasp, and she collapsed onto the floor, her sob. I stepped back, watching her crumble to the floor, her sobs echoing in the silence of the room. It was over. There was nothing left to say, no more explanations, no more begging. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The trust had been shattered beyond repair, and I wasn't about to rebuild something with someone who had destroyed it so easily. I turned and walked toward the door, my footsteps heavy but certain. I could hear her behind me, gasping for air between her sobs, but I didn't turn back. There was no more sympathy left in me, no more desire to fix things. I had been walking through a fog for months, unsure of what was real and what was just my own mind grasping at straws. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt clarity. I knew what I needed to do. As I reached the door, I paused for just a moment, looking back one last time. Laura was a mess, her body shaking, her face buried in her hands, but I didn't feel pity anymore. Just sadness for what we had lost, for the life we could have had if things had been different. But that life was gone. It had been gone for a long time. I hope you find peace, Laura, I said quietly, almost to myself. But it's not going to be with me. With that, I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The sound of it clicking shut felt like the final nail in the coffin, sealing the end of everything we had once been. It wasn't enough to just walk away from Laura. After everything she had put me through, I wanted some form of justice, something that would make her feel the weight of her decisions. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense, I didn't want to hurt her physically or publicly humiliate her. But I wasn't going to let her walk away from this completely unscathed. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her betrayal. And then I thought about her job. James, the man she had been having the affair with, was her boss. The same man she had chosen over me. That fact alone churned in my gut for weeks after the confession. It wasn't just some fling, it was with someone who had power over her, who had been involved in her professional life as well. That made it worse, much worse. It had tainted her career, her integrity, everything. I started gathering everything I knew, emails, text messages, anything that showed their inappropriate relationship. It wasn't hard to piece it together. The same phone she used to call me was the same one she used to communicate with him. I had access to the phone bills, the shared accounts, it was all there, laid out in front of me. I took screenshots of their conversations, proof that she and James had been meeting up during office hours, and even on company trips. I knew enough about her company to know that this kind of behavior was against their code of conduct. It wasn't just an affair, it was a violation of workplace ethics. And the best part, James was just as responsible as she was. If this came to light, they'd both be in trouble. I didn't make a grand move right away. I waited, collected my evidence carefully, making sure I had everything in place. Once I was ready, I sent an anonymous email to her company's HR department. I attached all the proof I had, emails, timestamps, details of their relationship. I framed it as concern for the integrity of the workplace, that a senior manager was using his position to engage in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. I didn't want to make it seem like a personal vendetta. I made it all about professional misconduct. It didn't take long for the dominoes to start falling. I didn't hear the details firsthand, but through the grapevine, I found out that Laura was called into HR, blindsided by the accusations. James, too. They tried to deny it at first, but the evidence was too overwhelming. There were whispers about an investigation, about meetings behind closed doors. Soon enough, Laura was put on leave while they sorted through the mess. A week later, she was fired. James didn't last much longer after that. He resigned under pressure, avoiding a full public scandal, but everyone knew what had happened. The affair had destroyed their careers. It wasn't just about their personal lives anymore, it had bled into their professional reputations, staining everything they had worked for. I didn't gloat about it. I didn't call her to rub it in. But there was a sense of satisfaction that came with knowing she couldn't just move on like nothing had happened. She couldn't just pretend that her choices didn't come with consequences. She had wrecked my life, and in the end, she had wrecked her own as well. People around us, our friends, family, were shocked at how quickly it all fell apart. They had no idea what had happened behind closed doors. I didn't offer explanations. Some things were too private, too painful to share. Besides, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I started focusing on my own life again, my career, my friendships, my hobbies. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was a chance to grow, to become someone stronger, someone more resilient. I wasn't the naive guy who had believed in forever, but I wasn't broken either. Months turned into a year, and I found myself feeling lighter, freer. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to move forward, to stop looking back at what could have been. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. As for Laura, I never saw her again. Occasionally, I'd hear her name in passing, a distant echo of a life I had once lived. But that's all she became, a memory, a lesson learned. In the end, I found peace. Maybe not the peace I thought I would find when I first imagined her confessing, but a quieter, more personal peace. A peace that came from knowing I had chosen myself in the end, that I had walked away from something that no longer served me. And that was enough. Sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to let you know how your support can make a huge difference. By subscribing to this channel, you're not only helping me financially but also enabling me to create even better stories and content for you. Your support directly impacts the quality and quantity of the stories I can bring to life, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of this journey.